Okay, and we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome to, I think this is the 17th episode of the Stellar Podcast. Doing it live again. I'm joined, as always, by Tyler Vanderhooven. This week we don't have like a prepped presentation or anything like that to talk about, so we're just gonna kind of cover the latest news in the Stellar ecosystem, ranging from SPF to New York Blockchain Week Hackathon, all that good stuff. Um, but basically, if anything is broken while the stream is going, please let us know in the chat. We're keeping an eye on it. But other than that, let's get started on this stuff. So we announced today that the Stellar Community Fund Round 4 nominations have closed. We have our 8 finalists. I will try to show them on the screen quick. So let's see if oh, it didn't. Sick. So to walk through these really quickly, and we'll kind of dive into each one. The 8 finalists are CoinQvest. I don't know actually how to say the name. Lumenscan, Nice Trade, the Papaya Anchor or apay.io, an SDK for Stellar QT, Send It, which is payment via email, Stellar Tip, Stellut, an e-voting platform, and that is all. So I don't know if you have any extra comments to add right now, Tyler, about one, the round up to this point, but then again about finalists.
Not a whole lot to add. I'm extremely proud and excited to have the finalists and get to this point. We have this 1 week break period to just kind of celebrate getting to this point, as well as narrow down, comb through the votes, and arrive at a final 8 projects. And then starting on Monday morning, we will begin the last week of final votes. So we've arrived at our finalists, our 8 projects here, but there's still 1 week next week where we'll be looking for votes to allocate the 3 million lumen prize pool by vote percentage to these 8 different projects. So extremely excited for getting to this point for the next round. Looking forward to seeing how this competition continues to grow and evolve and improve. Um, I think it's been a much smoother round, perhaps, than previous rounds, but continue to look forward watching it grow, and then also pulling in more participants from our other hackathons and efforts that we're making. This thing just gets better and better as we have more participants, and particularly as we see winners take their money and improve their projects and keep them alive. And um, I think that's really what we're wanting to see out of this. Perhaps in the past, particularly with the transition between Stellar Build Challenge and Stellar Community Fund, the tendency might have been to just kind of be serial entrepreneurs and build something, win, throw that out, and build something else. That's not what the SCF is intended to be. But I think that's kind of the way I would have treated the SBC back when I was competing. Was just continuously winning and continuously innovating, build new things. I just constantly have ideas, and I don't think we want to discourage that entirely. I don't think it's wrong to have new ideas and want to try them out. It's just, where does that fit the best? So to that end, I think Kolten talking a little bit about our Gitcoin hackathon and just hackathons in general, and how those are better suited for kind of short-term idea iteration, prize pools, et cetera, and why there is an importance to have a separation between larger funds for ongoing development and smaller fund pools just for cool ideas and trying new things out.
Yeah, but before we do that, I was just looking down at my phone because the infamous Stellar Zach let me know that it's pronounced CoinQuest, and we are not as smart as we think we are because we couldn't figure that out. So it's
Yeah, the Q is
CoinQuest.
silent.
Yeah,
It's
no, the
east.
V is silent. That magical V that's put in there. So,
Okay.
anyways, yeah, but moving on, we are doing another hackathon. This time it is virtual, and it is a New York Blockchain Week hackathon that's hosted by Gitcoin. So Gitcoin is basically a platform trying to create new ways to facilitate open source funding, and they do that through hackathons, they do that through bounties, they do that through things like quadratic funding. A whole bunch of different stuff is going on this whole platform. But essentially, a bunch of sponsors got together. We're doing a New York Blockchain Week hackathon because we still want New York Blockchain Week to live on, but this time it has to live on. And we are putting up a bounty, so there's going to be 3 prizes. The grand prize is 35,000 lumens. The runner-up is 12,500 lumens. and then third place is 7,500 lumens. Um, but basically, this is a place where people can, again, like you kind of mentioned, come explore ideas more than it is like build out a long-term project. Of course, we hope that whenever people participate in hackathons, that they continue building those things after the event. But that's not really what SCF is supposed to be about, right? Like the Stellar Community Fund is supposed to be a place where long-term projects can get their feet off the ground, they can get funding to keep going, that good stuff. Whereas hackathons are a place to sort of implement those ideas you've been thinking about for a long time, but you're not sure if it'll work, or maybe you're just wanting to experience the technology for the first time or whatever else. So the stakes are a little lower, but the opportunity to innovate is still high. And then, of course, we want to encourage these projects to continue building past the hackathon and then participate in the Stellar Community Fund. Specifically in this hackathon, we proposed a challenge that is the most engaging application demonstrating the Stellar Network's ability to connect the world's currencies. So we want people to kind of focus on building innovative solutions that are actually for a use case that makes sense on Stellar, whether that's payments or whether that's trading in and out of assets or whatever it is. And we posted a requirement in this challenge that we think is kind of interesting, but we want people to think about business models when they're actually building in hackathon. So we say that you must provide a video or demo that shows how it works and business model. This is one of the things that we find projects over the past like couple of years have been struggling with, right? Like ideas are great, but if you can't turn that idea into profit for your company, then you just won't have a company. Like it won't exist anymore, and that's where like the struggle for funding comes from. And of course, like not everything can be a company, not everything can be a business, but there are things that can be, and we want to encourage people to build those things. And I know Tyler, you have a lot of strong opinions about that, so I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, I think it's really important that that be kind of a default mindset, that we think about how are we going to make money off of this thing, and if it doesn't make sense or there's good reason not to, then pursue that route, but don't maybe necessarily default to that route. I think sometimes the problem is there's a confusion maybe between for profit and open source, that if it's for profit it can't be open source, and that obviously is not the case. You can run a for profit company and have your code be open source. So we're not against open source in any way, but thinking through, how am I going to turn this, how am I going to keep this thing alive, how am I going to continue to improve on this thing, how am I going to keep the doors open on this project, that if, especially if this thing is providing value and um, it's helpful to people and they're utilizing it in their services, that it's improving their lives in some way, it's not it's not at all outside the question of how do we get funding for it, because that's the incentive for you to keep working on it, to keep it alive. And there is place for kind of removing a single entity or even a group of people from sole ownership of something and just kind of putting it out there for people who get value out of it to contribute to it. But the whole reason that someone might choose to use your software is so that they don't have to maintain that piece of it. They can borrow from your open source code and use that functionality without having to rebuild it from the ground up. And so having a team that's focused on continuing to improve and build out functionality and fix bugs through a funded form is valuable, and that's good. And I think that's where we should start as a default. And then if that doesn't make sense, to really seriously consider why or how we can do something else. Which is one of the reasons I think Gitcoin's really exciting as a partnership platform, because that's their whole deal, is open source but for profit. That somehow we're leveraging either community or actual enterprises which have like pools of money that they can like partner through voting mechanisms. They're trying their hardest to find ways to fund or provide a platform for funding open source work. Uh, so understanding that there is a difference, you can have an open source project and still get funding for it. Even things like GitHub sponsorships, which opened up not that long ago, where you create your repositories and then give opportunities for your community to donate to you. It's like a Patreon model kind of. And then they also have matching programs right now with GitHub. So there's opportunities there. I mean, it's Patreon and even things like Kickstarter for very specific projects. There are ways to get funding from community. I think ultimately the thing maybe we struggle with more is have we actually created something valuable? Have we actually made something that the community at large sees as a benefit to the greater ecosystem, or is it really just something that I could use? And there's nothing wrong with that, but having to face the cold hard facts of, would people put their dollars behind this? Do they see it as so valuable that they're willing to put their hard-earned cash behind it? Is a great validation method for making sure you're working on things that are of highest impact. It helps direct your time towards those things which are most beneficial. So I'm a big believer in building legitimate business models and having an idea of how you're going to keep this thing alive beyond just it should be open source and that means that I can't make money from it and I'll get funding through external mechanisms like just grants or VC funding, or like things have to have an ROI. They have to return a value of some sort. That isn't always monetary, but oftentimes, I would say most times, it's a good place to start and then work from there. If it's not that, to really have some strong inclination as to, well, okay, if that's not it, what is it? How are you going to return on your investment? Who is going to keep this thing alive? Because the last thing you want is to build something amazing and then have it die because you couldn't didn't have a funding mechanism for it. You never even asked if people would pay money. You never provided a platform for people to pay for it. You didn't focus on the most important features because you never asked your users to um, back those feature requests with their money. Um, so just thinking through those things, I think it's an important trigger or requirement to have in something like this, and it's something I want to continue to explore.
I agree, and the link's kind of long, so I'll make sure after this to add the link to the actual bounty in the YouTube description, so anybody can find it after the fact. And if you're listening to this like days later and it's on the podcast, some podcast platform, I'm sure it's in the show notes. Some other information about it. It started, I think, yesterday, whenever the
Mhm.
6th was. So yesterday, and it's going until May 27th. So you almost have a full month to build something if you want to. I think you have like 20 days left. So it's a lot longer than the last hackathon we did. The last one we did
Mhm.
was like 36 hours or something like that. So you have more time to come up with like a really cool idea and work on it. And hopefully, with more people having free time at home, whether they're in quarantine or whatever, we'll see some cool stuff. We also put together a get started repository for people. It basically just has like uh, some quick links to developer resources, some stuff to get started with, some basic tools, some information about previous hackathons and SDF. So if you end up being interested in that, you can find the that in the show notes as well and started building. The next thing we wanted to talk about was that we will be at consensus. Not we as in me and Tyler, but we as in SDF. The day, it will be Tuesday, May 12th. I think they have a foundation track. We don't have a whole bunch to touch on here. We just wanted to say that so everybody was aware. So if you're watching online or you're registered to watch, I think Jed and Danelle and a couple others will be there participating. So make sure to tune.
It's a good, probably a good opportunity too to call out that stellar.org/events page,
Yeah,
um, just to keep sure, like, make sure you guys are bookmarking that. That's becoming a very active and updating page for us. So keep an eye on that events page where things like this and the consensus, as well as hackathons, things like that. Like anytime we're going to be showing up somewhere, um, it'll be posted in that page. So that's a good page to keep an eye on.
yeah, totally. And the link is super easy. It's just stellar.org/events. So you can go there. You can see what events are coming. You can click through, get details about where the actual event's posted and all that. So make sure to head over there to keep up with anything. And I think there's even an add to calendar button. So if you're like somebody who's big on calendars, actually add it to your from the actual page, which is pretty
Yep.
cool. So we'll continue building this out like Tyler mentioned. Okay, moving on. Documentation. So we recently opened up. I don't know. Is this considered like beta docs, early docs?
Early
I don't know.
release.
Yeah, early release docs. So we're kind of doing a revamp on the Stellar documentation. I think it's even though we do have some of the best docs in the biz, I guess it's important to kind of keep iterating on stuff and make it possible for people to navigate and to work through. Especially whenever like blockchain technology and Stellar in particular, like all of this stuff is very new and it's a lot to wrap your head around. So having docs that make that process significantly easier, it should always be right. Like developers need to be able to find resources point A to point B quickly. And I think these docs are pretty good first step in doing that. Um, Tyler, you worked on these more than me, so you can touch on
Yeah,
some of the work that kind of went into stuff.
yeah. So huge shout out to our web products team, all the developers and content creators and managers who are actually building the code behind these things and organizing all the content and getting like this isn't a template, like this is a custom coded piece of glorious beauty. Um, I wrote a piece. So if you go into the doc, so it's developers.stellar.org /docs. I think that's the first one that comes up. But then if you go down kind of in the middle on the left hand side there, there's a build apps um, drop down. And so I I wrote that piece on essentially how to build a wallet. Um, there'll be more content coming around some more in-depth stuff, but this is a really great place to get started with just building a pretty solid mobile wallet, or not mobile wallet, but a web wallet using the JavaScript SDKs. Um, covers things like secret key management and some security stuff. All the code is there. You can just walk through this whole tutorial on how to build an application using the Stellar SDK. It gives you a good place to kind of bounce off of to building your own stuff. We have run a core node, run an API server. Um, there's some deposit withdrawal stuff, issue assets. That's a phenomenal piece. Just some really good walkthroughs that will continue to like. This is going to be your place as developers to kind of walk through getting started. Where you have questions, this will be a reference place to get those code snippets that we all covet when writing applications. It's going to be really good for that. And then if you go to developers.stellar.org /API, that's where you're going to get our new API docs. So our REST API for Horizon, all of the endpoints and parameters. And so when you're using the Go SDK or the JavaScript SDK, which kind of wrap around, that's what they're doing, right? They're wrapping around this Stellar API when we're connecting to Horizon endpoints. This would be the API endpoints that those SDKs eventually are calling. So very helpful to know what functions are available, what the response codes are, to be able to build your application in a way where you can anticipate what those SDKs may be doing, as well as just finding where the SDKs that we support are. I would also like to mention that both of these are open source, and they're not just open source. So you can report, typos and hey, you missed a period or you misspelled Horizon. It's so that you can actually contribute. If you have a really strong tutorial that you want to have considered, submit it to GitHub. We may end up running a Stellar Community Fund round or some sort of the Stellar Battle thing. We may end up running some sort of a program where we can start to really adopt the open source nature of our documentation, not just for reporting issues, but for actually contributing to the documentation with helpful information, tutorials and explanations and call outs, and just making this a really good place for Stellar development, right? This isn't Stellar Development Foundation docs, this is Stellar docs. So it's important that this start to really bring in community involvement. So we'll be looking into good ways to do that, but calling it out, like you can find all of these docs on GitHub and begin to contribute your own contributions to this documentation, both the docs and the API. Would love to see more PRs being submitted. Now that we have these, we have good structure around it. To see some more tutorials and walkthroughs uh, being submitted, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, 100%. And I was gonna add, like, if you're reading the new documentation and you come across something that is confusing, we highly encourage you to raise that issue. Ultimately, like, there's stuff internally at SDF or people who are building on Stellar all the time that we have a fundamental understanding of that other people might not. So we might use a word that doesn't really make sense unless you first elaborate on it or whatever else. There's a whole host of things that can cause problems when trying to understand things in the Stellar ecosystem. So if you're reading this stuff and you come across something that's confusing, there's actually like an edit button top right near all the titles, so you can see like Ryzen API reference, and then there's a big edit button, or I guess not big, it's little, but this edit button here, you can click it and actually open up a GitHub issue and explain what the problem was that you encountered, right? Like, why didn't this sentence make sense? What could we add to make it make more sense? You know, there's all kinds of stuff that should and probably needs to be done to the docs, right? Because they're never going to be perfect. They're always going to be improving, and there's only so much that we can do internally to facilitate that. So it's important that everybody from the ecosystem, like Tyler said, like puts their hand in this, tries to make it the best they can.
Yeah.
Moving on. Oh, I was also going to show like the old docs too. So this is the old documentation. For those of you who are familiar with Stellar, you've probably been through this a time or two. It kind of explains like concepts and walkthroughs. But the problem here is that it's like all just broken up into these links, and you have to kind of like dig around, and it's super get lost. We see people like get lost in these docs all the time. So part of improving that was creating this like new flows, right? So you see issue assets, you click here, you can break down all of the different things that go into actually, right, the anatomy of an asset, actually issuing an asset, information about an asset. So if you come to the old docs, you like have to click here, go through the assets, read about them, and then there's like a guide down here somewhere issuing assets. So it's super easy to get lost, and it's super funky. So creating these sort of educational learning paths was another big step, I would say, for docs, like getting these ways to easily navigate all of the materials, so you're not just trying to like dig around in this host of links to figure out. That was, to me, that was like the most important piece of docs. Okay, moving on. Pretty soon, let me see if I can scroll up and find the date. But pretty soon, yeah, here we go. Public network votes upgrade. So pretty soon, we'll be having a vote to upgrade the network to Protocol 13. This is where somebody in the chat said link to the docs. Yeah, we'll add links to the description of the video as soon as we get a chance. I actually might be able to post it in. Let's see. Welcome. Tyler, you're going to have to edit this out and post. LOL. All right, cool. So that's the link to the docs, or it should be. But anyway, what I was saying is that Protocol 13, a vote for Protocol 13 is basically around the corner. So the testnet actually upgraded to Protocol 13 like literally today. So if you're looking to experiment with some of the new features, you'll be able to. Most of the features aren't going to be like something that affects your everyday life for now on Stellar, but it does set the stage for some pretty cool stuff in the future, such as like multiplex accounts if we ever decide to do that and whatnot. So the public network vote is actually on what's after May, June 4th, 2020. So that's when basically all of the validators on the network who are in the main quorum set will actually get to vote on whether or not the network will upgrade this new protocol. If you want to see some of the new stuff being added, I will post a link to that in the chat. But basically, there are, it looks like 5 caps being added, such as fee bump transactions, fine-grained control of authorization, first-class multiplex accounts, clear pre-auth transaction signer on failed transactions, and then remove no issuer operation results. So some of these are like in the nitty gritty of the core protocol and might not be particularly interesting for some people, but some of these are actually pretty cool. So basically what fee bump transactions will allow you to do, change the fee on a transaction for yourself or for others, if I'm not mistaken. So basically there could be situations where like you have an escrow contract and the fee that was used to pay for that escrow contract is low. You need to change it in the future. So fee bump transactions will actually allow you to bump that fee so nothing gets like locked in a contract or the transaction fails or weird. And then the other one that I know a little bit about is cap 27. So basically this makes it to where multiplex accounts can be implemented into the protocol. And so multiplex accounts, like the goal of those was to kind of solve that custodial memo problem where you have custodial exchanges like Coinbase or others who basically share one account from users, and the only thing that distinguishes those users is memos and transactions. But basically, multiplex accounts will be able to solve that problem by including more data on accounts. I don't know all of the super technical details, but it's not super important. You just know that it solves the memo problem. I don't know if there's any of these that you're particularly interested in, Tyler. Maybe fee bump transactions.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good one, and it lays the foundation for. I mean, I would argue that this particular cap is. I mean, there's a lot of really neat things going on, but it's the cap, probably the next few caps that come after this,
Yeah,
that are going to be more exciting is the right word, but
yeah,
laying a very strong foundation for future functionality, which is going to really improve the usability of Stellar in more enterprise level use cases. So that would be things that I'm more excited about. And if you want to see what some of those are, we were talking about with John Jove a few weeks ago. It was Cap 25, right?
yeah,
So like go to the Stellar if you're interested in what some of those ones that didn't make it into Protocol 13, but will make it into future protocol versions, hopefully. Just go to our Stellar GitHub, look for the ecosystem caps, core advancement proposals, and just look through some of those that haven't made it into version bumps, or click on some of these and get a better sense of what some of these are, what they might allow for. We might cover a couple of these in future shows, but the whole process of, I mean, if you haven't listened to those John Jove episodes that we did a couple of weeks ago, make sure and go back and listen to those, because it really does a good job of outlining the CAP process, how it's different from the SEP process, and the way that the Stellar engine arrives at updates, how it adds new functionality or patches for existing issues or what have you. It's quite fascinating, and touches on an area that I'm not super familiar with, but ultimately it's the most important. Like, it is the Stellar part of Stellar. The thing that we deal in with more Horizon is just a sanitized version of core.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, like that's where most of the work is happening, is inside of core, when it comes to the actual thing that we call Stellar.
Yeah, I feel like the core protocol of any network is like the one thing that everybody understands. Like everybody loves when you finally get a feature that you've been like really wanting,
Yeah.
and that's why we can't like wax eloquent on all of the nitty gritty of some of these apps, because it's like really deep in the, and it's hard for us to understand, because like Tyler was saying, we usually interact with a very watered down Horizon API. So anything you do is presented to you in such a way that it's fundamentally easy to understand, and you're taking advantage of the functionality that's underneath it all. You're not directly interacting with that stuff. So I can only imagine how hard it is to like implement stuff and get it right and whatnot. And conversation with John was pretty eye opening in that regard, because a lot of conversations that have to go around like trade offs. What are the consequences? What could happen if this breaks? What happens, if this doesn't break but doesn't work as intended? Like, or is there a better way to implement? So much stuff to consider when you're making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I also posted a link in the chat to the actual list of core advancement proposals, which are basically things that have either been implemented or being considered for implementation on the Stellar Core protocol. So you can deep dive into some of the ones that have been implemented. You can see whether they've been implemented, or if they're final, or if they're actually still in draft phase. So there's a lot going on here. If you're interested in like diving super deep in this stuff, feel free. It's sometimes fun, sometimes it gives you a headache. That's totally it's totally up to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, is there any other news this week to touch on? We've only been going for about 30 minutes, so there's anything else that you found interesting.
I mean, it would just be kind of circling back on Stellar Community Fund, and just excitement around that, wanting to see that grow and improve, and the good projects that came out this round, and wanting to see that grow. I'm super excited and grateful for the work that you've done to get hackathons kind of kicked off. I feel like that was a bit of a missing piece when it came to SCF, when you only have that one funding mechanism that really does have a different purpose than what a lot of developers may be looking for. it's just great to have kind of two funding mechanisms or two avenues for um, rewarding work in the ecosystem. So that's really cool to have both of those running concurrently. Um, but other than calling out Stellar Community .fund, and make sure if you're listening, go to that site. Pop in next week and put your votes in for the final 8. You can vote up to 3, vote for up to 3. Um, I'm excited to see how that continues to grow and improve. I think it's a important part of our ecosystem.
Yeah, I know we've spent like so much time over the over the past couple of weeks, like trying to figure out events, trying to figure out content, trying to figure out how to optimize SEF, how to figure out how to continue hackathons, all that good stuff. So it's kind of cool to see not only all of it kind of paying off and all of it, but it's also cool to see like the community rally behind it all a little bit. So without you guys like pitching us ideas or giving feedback, none of this works well. So it's important that like if there's something we could be doing better, or there's some idea you have, that you please pass it on to us so we think about how to best make that stuff happen. Um, that's pretty much all I wanted to add to that. But also, I pulled up stellarcommunity.fund on the stream so everybody could see. Like, um, basically, you can literally just come here, click through to a project, and vote on it. It's connected to Keybase, so it's really easy. We highly encourage participation, right? Because it's a pretty good amount of funds that's being allocated. So it's important that you read the proposals, make educated votes, also encourage others. But if that is it, we can start closing this out. If you want to listen to the other podcasts, you can either go to this YouTube channel, click subscribe, like the video, share the video. Also, go to podcast.stellar.org to check out all the stuff we've done. We have a bunch of episodes. There's been 1 million people a week, so we have cool stuff lined up. It should be pretty fun. But also, if you want the latest on Protocol 13 stuff, there's a blog post we put out called Guide to Protocol 13. So if you're a developer, I highly suggest you read it because it will affect you. Also, if you're building a service on Stellar, it will affect you. That you can also follow the Stellar Twitter for updates on this stuff as well. But with that being said, I think we can close it out. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Tyler, any closing remarks?
Nope. Thanks, guys, for hanging out with us. It's always a good time, and we'll see you again next week.
Cool. Bye, everybody.
See y'all.